people think that goes away in April with the heat.
Welcome to Planet America. I'm John Barron.
I'm Chad Ciadello.
This week is a second coronavirus lockdown looming in America.
And another black man gunned down by police as Black Lives Matter protests continue.
Plus, Rampgate and Watergate, what the latest media flap tells us about the Trump era.
And a landmark court case for gay and trans rights with an unlikely champion. But first,
the death of another black man at the hands of police has given renewed impetus to Black Lives Matter protests this week. 27-year-old Rashad Brooks was shot 3 times in the back by a police officer in Atlanta after falling asleep in the drive-through section of a Wendy's restaurant, getting into a scuffle with police after apparently failing a sobriety test, being tasered, taking the taser, running and being gunned down. Investigators initially claimed Brooks was shot while struggling with the officers over the taser and resisting arrest. Mobile phone and security footage soon showed he was running away, telling police he needed to be at his daughter's birthday on the weekend. Protesters later set fire to the restaurant. Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms was not mincing words.
It didn't have to end that way. I mean, it's you know, it pissed me off, it makes me sad, and I'm frustrated.
And Keisha Lance Bottoms is one of the potential vice presidential running mates now being vetted by the Biden campaign chairs.
she's certainly a straight talker, and it's noteworthy that not only was the offending officer sacked within 2 days of the shooting, but the chief of police resigned the day after the shooting as well. So the consequences for these deaths are coming surer and faster than they used to. But I'd just like to focus on the death itself, because there's been a lot of talk about police killing unarmed people. But there's only about 50 of those a year, whereas there's 1,000 police shootings of armed people a year. And these can be a little more grey. Let's take a look at this one. So Brooks has taken the cop's taser, he's running away, and then he turns around and tries to tase the officer. And that's when the officer shoots him. So, is that an excessive use of force? The Atlanta PD policy manual says a cop can shoot a suspect if they've committed a crime involving the infliction or threatened infliction of serious physical harm. And actually, hang on, stop. Brooks fell asleep in his car, then he wrestled with the police, and then he tried to run away. None of that is serious physical harm, so that's not going to work. Let's go to the next reason. They can shoot a suspect if he possesses a deadly weapon, which this guy didn't, or an object that is likely to or actually does result in serious bodily injury. Okay, you can be injured by a taser. Some people have even been killed by tasers, but is it likely to result in serious bodily injury? The answer to that question will determine what happens to that cop.
Meanwhile, in response to last month's killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis, earlier today, President Trump signed an executive order which doesn't so much reform policing as encourage police forces to reform. It pushes for training in de-escalation and discourages the use of chokeholds. It also calls for police to have co-responders with them, with expertise in mental health, addiction and homelessness.
Americans believe we must support the brave men and women in blue who police our streets and keep us safe. Americans also believe we must improve accountability, increase transparency, and invest more resources in police training, recruiting, and community engagement.
And Senate Republicans are looking at a bill that would actually ban police methods like chokeholds, while House Democrats are pushing for much wider reforms. President Trump has meanwhile been talking up his achievements on behalf of the black community, putting himself in some rather rarefied company.
I think I've done more for the black community than any other president, and let's take a pass on Abraham Lincoln because he did good, although it's always questionable. You know, in other words, the end result.
Well, we are free, Mr. President.
But we
you
are
did
free.
pretty well.
You understand what I mean?
Yeah, no,
so I'm going to take a pass on Abe, Honest Abe, as we call it.
Well, he did take a pass on Lincoln. Very modest indeed.
Humble.
As far as reform goes, though, that largely is going to come at the state level, and it may well happen. Look how incredibly popular Black Lives Matter has become over the last few months. It's got a net approval of about plus 30 points, and almost every every reform on the table is popular as well, except for one. There's only one proposed reform that's not popular, and it's, you guessed it, defund the police, which polls at 34% to 64%, even though it has majority Democratic support. Even the softer version, reduce the budget of the police department in your community, polls at 39% to 60%, with, once again, majority Democratic support. I don't know where this goes, John, but half a loaf is there for the taking if the Democrats want it.
Well, now, Chaz, to Rampgate. After delivering an address at the West Point Military Academy on the weekend, President Trump was seen walking very hesitantly down a ramp. The Rampgate hashtag was soon trending on Twitter. The New York Times reported Trump's halting walk down ramp raises new health questions. And cable news gave it the full treatment.
There are some questions this morning about President Trump's health. And it's because of this video of the president where you see him walking very haltingly, one leg at a time. It starts happening here.
OK, Dr Sanjay Gupta, stop fiddling around with the coronavirus pandemic for a second. Why is the president walking weirdly?
Balance problems? Is there some weakness there? Is there numbness in the feet, perhaps a type of neuropathy? Is it just a slippery ramp?
OK, to be fair to Sanjay, he did also say you cannot make a diagnosis over the television. And this is how the president described his Rampgate experience.
The ramp that I descended after my West Point commencement speech was very long and steep, had no handrails, and most importantly, was very slippery.
Well, that kind of supports the diagnosis of steep, slippery ramp, but the anti-Trump Twitterverse was not buying that, estimating the ramp was on a very gentle 11-degree slope and noting there had been no rain to make it slippery. But wait, there's more. Not just Rampgate, there's Watergate. The Times also reports the president appeared to have trouble raising a glass of water to his mouth during that speech at West Point, and then pointed out it all happened a day before he turned 74. Not so subtly reminding us he is the oldest a president has ever been in his first term. And here's the Watergate incident. First, the president gets a bit mumble-mouthed.
To all of the parents, grandparents, and family members watching this ceremony.
Then he raises his water glass to his mouth with his right hand, stops, gives it a boost with his left, making his right arm, which is his dominant arm, look a little bit weak. So, are we looking at a president with some kind of neurological damage, maybe a stroke? Was he really suffering from bone spurs all along? Or are we looking at a case of dry mouth, maybe arthritis, a golfing injury to his shoulder? Once again, the problem here is a lack of transparency and the lack of trust. Ever since Trump dictated his own medical letter in 2015 stating his physical strength and stamina are extraordinary and he'd be the healthiest individual ever elected to the presidency. Ever since that moment, we have known this president lies about his health. Whether he's had a stroke or he's just got a bit of a sore arm, we just would not know. In recent decades, voters have had that kind of information when deciding who to elect to office, Chaz.
Look, I disagree with you with one bit there, John. While Trump absolutely should be more forthcoming with his medical information, and Biden could be a bit more transparent as well, by the way, I don't think that's why this has become a story. I think the reason this is a story is because the media is easily distracted by bullshit and they have the memory of the metaphorical goldfish.
But he was walking weirdly.
One leg at a time. How else do you walk? Anyway, this is from January 2017.
Seems British government sources told the British press that President Trump held May's hand because he has batmophobia, a fear of ramps and stairs. Really watching his step coming down the stairs of the Capitol, even while climbing just a couple of steps at the White House. Coming off his plane, eyes on his feet, clutching the railing.
And this is also from 2017. So I don't think Trump did have a golfing niggle or a stroke. I just think he likes to be careful around stairs and to drink water like a primary school kid. Yeah, like that. And that's okay. Either way, get ready for more of this kind of innuendo, because both sides have itchy YouTube fingers and election 2020 is shaping up to be an absolute antiques roadshow.
Look, Chaz, it may be that Trump is trying to avoid a Gerald Ford moment when he famously fell over and it became symbolic of a failing presidency, or maybe he has got health issues. The media asking questions is reasonable. They should have asked more questions about Ronald Reagan and Jack Kennedy. The problem, in my view, is the lack of credible answers.
Well, let's provide some COVID answers at least. The daily deaths seem to drop about 100 every week. They're now down to about 700 a day. But unfortunately, the cases are holding at a touch over 20,000 a day. In fact, they're now starting to increase a little again. But what's really happening there is the northeastern states are doing well. The Midwest doing well as well, but the South is looking dire and the West isn't great for that matter either, which only confirms what we knew from the state map already. The 6 states on target, according to the federal guidelines, are Wisconsin, Illinois, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut and Delaware, and the South and West are not looking good at all. There are now 27 states in the red zone, which means they are regressing. And the 2 most worrying states are Florida. These are Florida's cases there, which have seen a 139% increase in the last 2 weeks, and Arizona, where not only has this been the second fortnight in a row that its daily cases have doubled, but its positive testing rate has also doubled to over 15% of tests coming back positive, even while the number of tests being conducted every day is rising. Thankfully, even Arizona's deaths are staying flat for now, so fingers crossed. Deaths do tend to be a delayed indicator, so we'll see. Although we should remember, death isn't the only concern facing COVID sufferers, like a fellow in Seattle who was in hospital with COVID for 62 days before emerging with a clean bill of health and a massive bill of $1.122 million. That bill ran for 181 pages. Hope they didn't charge him for printing as well, John. Welcome to the US healthcare system.
Yeah, he must have rented the TV set. In the week when a British study revealed a cheap and widely used steroid was found to reduce the risk of dying from COVID-19, the Food and Drug Administration in the United States, the FDA, withdrew its authorisation for the emergency use of the anti-malarial drugs, hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine, for the treatment of COVID-19. FDA Chief Scientist Denise Hinton saying in a letter to the Department of Health and Human Services yesterday that clinical trials suggest the drug may not be effective in the treatment of COVID-19 and that the drug's potential benefits do not outweigh the known and potential risks. President Trump, who took the drug for 2 weeks as a preventative after several White House staff tested positive, is still a firm believer, publicly quizzing HHS Secretary Alex Azar about the decision.
A lot of the data that has come out that was more negative was people who were quite ill in the hospital.
People that were like seriously ill, like they weren't going to make it. Let's give them a little hydroxy, and then they don't make it, and they say, oh, well, maybe the president was wrong.
Got it. The trouble here is this medicine is being given to really sick people. Give it to somebody like Trump who doesn't have COVID and he's fine, so it works.
Yeah, well, so much for cures, but what about prevention? Like just wearing a plain old mask. There's been about 5 studies in the last 2 weeks reiterating that mask wearing offers significant benefits. And here are 2 more indicators. 2 hairdressers in Missouri were infected with COVID while in contact with 140 clients and 6 co-workers. But they wore masks and observed as much distancing as they could. And 3 weeks later, literally none of their clients contracted COVID-19. 0 out of 140. And finally, we're still waiting to find out whether those protests 2 weeks ago are going to spark an outbreak, but early results out of Minneapolis are promising. 3,300 protesters were later tested and only 1.4% of the early results contracted COVID. Once again, most of them wore masks, so they seem to work. Someone tell Trump's campaign team that.
Well, Chaz, for more, we're joined by Dr Chen. He's one of America's top health policy advisors. He served in both the Obama administration and as Mitt Romney's policy director during his 2012 presidential campaign.
Chen, welcome to Planet America.
Good to be back.
Now, Lanny, you're in the California Bay Area, and last time we spoke to you, you were in lockdown. Now you're not in lockdown, even though now there are many more new daily COVID cases in California than there were back then. So was California wrong then, or is it wrong now?
Well, I'm not sure it was wrong in either situation, to be honest. I think before there was a very real concern about overcrowding of hospitals because the case acceleration rate was a lot higher then than it was now. And so the concern was, are we going to overwhelm the hospitals? So shutdown and lockdown procedures were put in place. The hospital and healthcare system here in California, and indeed in many parts of the country, ended up being fine. Now we have a slightly different issue now, which is that we're testing a lot more people. So we're identifying many more cases. And of course, as things begin to open up, we would expect for cases to grow. But so far, at least, the rate of increase of those cases has not been concerning, at least in the San Francisco Bay Area. Los Angeles is a slightly different story, which is all to say very complicated. But I don't know that you can fault the decisions then, nor can you fault the notion of reopening now.
Lanny, what are your thoughts on the timing that we've seen of these shutdowns, particularly in states like Florida, Texas, Arizona, that are seeing a spike in cases? Can they get through this without the need for a second shutdown?
Well, a second shutdown would be extremely disruptive. And I think the goal is to figure out how do you put in place more targeted interventions. I'll give you one example. We're learning increasingly here in the U.S. that a very high percentage of the deaths that occur from COVID-19 are occurring in nursing homes and skilled nursing facilities where older Americans have gone and are living. And so if we can figure out a way to ensure that we're not seeing widespread cases in those facilities, we can bring the death rate down, but also bring, hopefully, the case burden down as well. So that's one example of a way in which you would want to have policy interventions that are a little bit more targeted and a little bit more specific than a widespread shutdown. I think that's what policymakers here in the U.S. are hoping for.
In hindsight, should people have just worn masks rather than having a lockdown?
Well, it's a great question because initially the guidance here in the United States from the Centers for Disease Control to state and local public health authorities was don't wear masks. It doesn't make a difference, and we need those masks for first responders. Now, of course, the guidance is very, very different, and it's please wear face coverings. In fact, in some jurisdictions, face coverings are mandated. The evidence very early on from places like Taiwan, South Korea, where they were very effective at controlling spread of the virus, is that masks did make a difference. So, yeah, I would have argued that we should have done more with masking earlier here. It may have helped us to avoid some of the more draconian periods of the lockdown. Hindsight's 20/20. But going forward, there should be no question that mask wearing is an important part of controlling the spread of the virus and a possible second wave.
Lanhee, we have seen the complete politicisation of the issue of wearing masks. President Trump pointedly refusing to wear one in public, Joe Biden pointedly wearing one in public at every opportunity. Given that, if there were some kind of a recommendation or indeed a mandatory order for Americans to wear masks, do you think they would comply, or would half the country just refuse? Yeah,
I think in some jurisdictions it would not be effective at all, or would simply be ignored, or would in fact be the source of some kind of protest. Where I live here in Northern California, a mask wearing mandate probably gets observed because of the politics of the area. But you're absolutely right, John. The degree to which this has become polarized is very discouraging because it really is a matter of basic common sense. And I'd argue, in fact, a matter of basic hygiene, that you would encourage people to take what is actually a very simple step to kill transmission of the virus. But it is not something that a national policy can address. That is to be sure. A national prohibition on, for example, going into a restaurant without a mask, without a face covering, that is not only antithetical, I think, to how we generally make policy in the U.S., but it's also the case that it would probably be ignored by many Americans and therefore ineffective.
Lanhee Chen, great to talk to you again. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
And in exciting news, I've got one of those photos over my shoulder like John does. Cool, hey? Oh, and the Supreme Court just ruled 6-3 that employment discrimination against gay and transgender people is against the law. The 4 lefty judges teamed up with Chief Justice Roberts and Trump appointee Neil Gorsuch to find that sex discrimination laws automatically cover discrimination against gay people and transgender people. Justice Gorsuch explained it this way. Consider an employer with 2 employees, both of whom are attracted to men. The 2 individuals are, to the employer's mind, identical in all respects, except that one is a man and the other a woman. If the employer fires the male employee for no reason other than the fact he's attracted to men, the employer is discriminating against him for traits the employer tolerates in his female employee. So there is a logic there. And similarly for transgender people, if an employer fires a transgender woman who was born male but retains an otherwise identical employee who was born female, the employer is intentionally penalising the employee born male for traits or actions that the employer tolerates in an employee born female. That's sexual discrimination. Now, Justice Alito was not impressed with that at all. He seemed to think Gorsuch was playing word games, and he said, "Our duty is to interpret statutory terms to mean what they conveyed to reasonable people at the time they were written." And I'm not sure anyone thinks back in 1964 that Congress believed they were passing protections for gay or transgender people. But Gorsuch's view is that it doesn't matter what Congress meant. What matters is what they wrote down, and it's his job to interpret those words literally. Either way, there are a lot of Christian conservatives out there, John, who held their tongues voting for Trump and have put up with a lot of crap just so Gorsuch could be appointed. And today, they would not be happy.
It's almost like they got Merrick Garland after all, Chaz. This year's presidential election, like most in recent decades, is likely to be decided in just a handful of competitive states. In 2016, out of almost 129 million votes cast for either Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton, fewer than 80,000 ballots in 3 swing states decided the result. So, to find out more about the states that could decide the presidency for the next 4 years, Planet America is going on a road trip. The bags are packed, we've got a full tank of gas, and this week we're headed to Michigan, the Wolverine state.
Don't hit my friends.
Actually, this is a wolverine. It's not a wolf, it's a big nasty member of the weasel family, with a reputation for being pretty ornery. And weirdly, wolverines don't even live in Michigan except in the zoo. They aren't even the official state animal, but Michiganders still like to call themselves wolverines because they're ornery. Michigan is also called the Mitten State, which is a lot less scary, but the bottom bit does look a lot like a mitten and it can get very cold. And confusingly, Michigan is also called the Great Lakes State. There are more than 11,000 lakes. Literally half the state is water. But seriously, how many names do you want, Michigan? Once the automotive capital of the world, a who's who of car makers started businesses in and around Detroit, Michigan in the early 20th century. Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, Packard, assembly lines mass-produced affordable cars for ordinary Americans and the world. By the 1930s, Detroit had grown to become the 4th largest city in America, pumping out around 80% of all cars in the world and helping fuel the great migration of African Americans from the south to the north and west. In World War II, it was Michigan's car makers and workers who retooled to build the planes and tanks and jeeps that would help defeat Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. But with the arrival of peace, Detroit and Michigan's slow decline began. Automation and competition meant fewer jobs. In 1950, 1.8 million people lived in Detroit. Now, it's fallen to below 700,000, although by the late 50s, Detroit was dominating another industry, popular music. The Motown sound put black artists at the top of the hit parade and provided a soundtrack for the civil rights era, although Detroit was also the scene of some of the most destructive and violent riots of that time. Michigan today has a population of a shade under 10 million, and that's hardly changed in a decade. 3/4 are white, 14% black, although Wayne County, which takes in Detroit, is more than 40% black. And Michigan has been hard hit by the economic collapse triggered by the coronavirus pandemic. Unemployment stood at 3.8% in January. 3 months later, it had shot up to almost 23%. And that's really bad news for cities like Flint, Michigan, which is already suffering from 10% unemployment before the world fell in a heap. Decades of downsizing by car makers saw the local economy collapse and the water supply contaminated by lead. And then there's Michael Moore.
Come on, darling, let your spirits rise. Come on, children, open up your eyes.
In 2016, Michigan voted for Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton by a slim margin, 10,704 votes. And that was a bit of a shock for Democrats who'd won every election there since 1992. In 2012, Obama won it by nearly 10 points. In 2018, Democrat Gretchen Whitmer won the governorship by almost 10 points, and Debbie Stabenow, the Democratic senator, held off a challenge from rising Republican star John James with a 6.5-point margin. In 2020, the question is, does Donald Trump retain a particular appeal to Michigan, or are Democrats starting to re-establish their hold on the state? Polls right now suggest the latter. In the average of Michigan polls, Joe Biden leads by over 7 points. But within that, there are polls putting Biden 12 points ahead, or just 2. So we'll just have to wait until November to see what those ornery Wolverines really have in mind. Former US Vice President Joe Biden continues to enjoy an 8-point lead in the average of national polls this week.
Oh, if I could just interrupt that car race for a second, John, add those two numbers together there and you get 91.5%, which means there's only 8.5% of uncommitted votes left.
Oh, good at this numbers.
I am. But that's another issue for Trump, though, because back in 2016, even the month before the election, there were still 15% of voters left uncommitted. So there's about half as many undecideds now, which means fewer votes left on the table for Trump to potentially win. It makes his challenge even tougher.
All right, well, another measure of President Trump's polling woes at the minute is this survey from the state of Arkansas showing Biden is now within the margin of error, trailing by just 2 points in a state the Republicans have held for almost a quarter of a century, and one in which Trump won by almost 27 points just 4 years ago.
By the way, I know Biden seems miles ahead, and he is, but 538 made an interesting point this week. If we look at all the swing states that have had more than 3 polls since May the 1st, Biden looks quite comfortable there. He only needs to win Michigan, Wisconsin and Arizona, and he's ahead in all those other states as well. But if Trump simply banks a 3.5-point swing from here, and that is doable, look what happens then. Trump then has a bunch of narrow victories and Biden's 1 state short. Now, the real world doesn't have uniform swings like that, but it shows you that the Electoral College still favours Trump. If Biden's going to win this election, he needs to win the popular vote by a lot.
Indeed he does. Meanwhile, President Trump is going to be looking to recapture some of the spirit of 16 when he takes the stage at his first rally in 3 months this weekend in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It'll be held on Saturday now. It was rather hastily rescheduled last week so it wouldn't fall on the anniversary of the emancipation of the slaves, known as Juneteenth. That's Friday the 19th. There are also concerns as well about the potential spread of COVID-19. Oklahoma has moved to stage 3 reopening, allowing larger venues to operate with very limited physical distancing protocols. The Trump campaign says nearly 1 million people, that is equal to a quarter of the state's population, have expressed interest in going to this rally, which was planned for a 19,000-seat centre, the Box Centre, which may now have to be moved to a larger outdoor venue.
Finally, Trump's gone to a lot of trouble to maximise his crowds by relocating his convention as well to Jacksonville, Florida. But the problem is all the grunt work of the convention has to occur in the original location of Charlotte or the Republicans will breach their contract. Now, it doesn't make a lot of sense to have 5,000 delegates paying to fly to Charlotte when all the speeches and fanfare of the convention will be happening in Jacksonville. So the Republicans decide to cut their losses and have no grunt work, just recycle the 2016 platform again and have the old platform serving as the official party platform until 2024. And that's fine, except a lot of the 2016 platform is out of date, especially all the bits that are critical of the current president. Makes it very hard to design a campaign ad.
America demanded change.
Donald Trump wins the presidency.
And change is what we got. Under President Trump, America is stronger. safer, and the huge increase in the national debt incurred during the current administration has placed a significant burden on future generations. Good! Because as the party of values, we want to add value today. We believe in trust, which is why the current administration has abandoned America's friends and rewards its enemies. Oh, come on! But they were bad friends. We stuck with the good friends.
He wrote me beautiful letters. We fell in love.
There you go. You see, we believe in the Founding Fathers' vision for a proud nation where the current administration has exceeded its constitutional authority and brazenly and flagrantly violated the separation of powers, and that's just the way we like it.
When somebody's the president of the United States, the authority is total, and that's the way it's got to be.
Now, in 2020, we're asking for your vote again for a president who has refused to defend or enforce laws he does not like and used executive orders to enact national policies.
Keystone Pipeline.
Yes, the current administration creates debt, breaks rules, and has contempt for the rule of law. And that's making America great again.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
And that is it for another trip to Planet America. We'll see you back here at the same time next week.
And don't forget the Fireside Chat this Friday on ABC News Channel. See you there.
Good night.